So let's open our Bibles this morning to Mark chapter 6. We're going to be in verse 45 through 52 this morning. Mark chapter 6, verses 45 through 52. Immediately, he made his disciples get into the boat and to go before him to the other side to Bethsaida while he dismissed the crowd. And after he'd taken leave of them, he went up to the mountain to pray. And when evening came, the boat was out on the sea, and he was alone on the land. And he saw them. They were making headway painfully, for the wind was against them. And he came the fourth watch the night. He came to them walking on the sea. He meant to pass by them. But when they saw him walking on the sea, they thought it was a ghost, and cried out, for they all saw him and were terrified. But immediately he spoke to them and said, "Take heart, it is I. Do not be afraid." And he got into the boat with them, and the wind ceased. And they were utterly astounded, for they did not understand about the loaves, but their hearts were hardened. You know, sometimes I read through the Gospels, and I wonder how in the world could the disciples have spent so much time with Jesus and not grasp who he truly was. I mean, they have an inside track to all of his teaching. They have a front row seat to all of his miracles. They're even able to actively participate in his ministry, as we saw a few weeks ago, as he sent them out to heal the sick and to cast out demons. Yet time and time again, when we watch the disciples, we see that their actions reveal the truth, that they don't really understand who Jesus is. One thing we've seen constantly through the book of Mark is that proximity to and affinity for Jesus is not the same thing as faith in Jesus. There are many things, many ways we can be ever closer to Jesus but not have true faith in Jesus. See, at this stage in Jesus' ministry, the disciples are not pursuing Jesus as an end in himself. In fact, here they're very little different than the crowds. The crowds that gathered for the feeding of the 5,000, crowds that were looking for a political Messiah to deliver Israel from Roman rule. In fact, as we get a little further on in the book of Mark, we're going to see that a number of these disciples are trying to leverage their personal relationship with Jesus for their own personal gain in the Messianic kingdom. See, Mark doesn't hide the issues that the disciples are working through. He helps us walk with them in their understanding and comprehension and finally faith in Jesus. As we turn to our text today, Mark exposes us to the fundamental truth, and I think it's the main point of our passage today, is that hard hearts pose a greater threat to personal discipleship than any form of physical danger ever could. Hard hearts pose a greater threat to personal discipleship than any form of physical danger. See, up until this point, in the Gospel of Mark, Jesus he's cast out demons, he's healed the sick, he's stilled the raging storm with just a command. And in the previous passage, he fed 5,000 men, not including women and children, with 5 loaves and 2 fishes. And we see the disciples, they don't have a clue. The disciples know Jesus is from God. They have a growing hope that he might be the promised Messiah. But they don't realize that he's God in human flesh. They don't see that yet. So let's go to our text today in verse 45. Immediately following the miracle of the 5 loaves and 2 fish, immediately he made his disciples get into the boat and go before him to the other side, to Bethsaida, while he dismissed the crowd. And after he had taken leave of them, he went up to the mountain to pray. So Jesus here is still with the crowd from last week and his disciples. And as we begin this text here, notice it begins with this urgency. They're all together. The baskets have just been brought in, 12 baskets full of bread, and Jesus rushes his disciples out the door. Immediately, he made his disciples get in the boat. Immediately. See, he doesn't let them hang out with the crowd. He doesn't let them slip off to the side and take a nap. He forces them to get into the boat and leave. And he does it at a time when the sun is quickly setting. The day is at its end. He's trying to get the crowds home. But why would Jesus want to dismiss the crowds all by himself without his disciples present? I mean, he takes them everywhere he goes. They get to participate in everything that he does. I think the parallel in John chapter 6 gives us some insight into what's going on. Same miracle. John chapter 6, starting in verse 13. So they gathered them up and filled 12 baskets with fragments from the 5 barley loaves left by those who had eaten. When the people saw the sign that they had done, they said, "This is indeed the prophet who is to come into the world." Perceiving then that they were about to come and take him by force to make him king, Jesus withdrew again to the mountain by himself. See, there's a little more going on right after this miracle than we clearly see in Mark. We have a crowd that's ready to make Jesus king. And they have some insight that we talked about last week of what the miracle was showing us. Remember last week we saw that the feeding of the 5,000 was showing us that Jesus is greater than Moses. He is the prophet, the promised prophet from Deuteronomy chapter 18 that was supposed to come in the world. And in John, they acknowledge it. This is the prophet. This is the Messiah. This is the one who's supposed to be coming. And the disciples are getting caught up in this messianic fervor because the Greek verb behind our English word made, it's a really strong verb, and it suggests that the disciples don't want to leave. They're excited too. It's just that they're not excited about the right thing. So at this moment, no one, not even Jesus' disciples, understand the true nature and the ultimate cost of his gospel mission. See, Jesus is not going to ascend to the throne in a groundswell of nationalistic fervor, and it's not going to be through this military action bathed in Roman blood. Jesus is going to ascend to the throne in the face of abject rejection. And he's going to conquer his enemies by pouring out his own blood for them. Which is the exact reason he retreats into the mountains to pray. Disciples go out of the water. Jesus goes up on to the mountain. The Gospel of Mark only records 3 times where Jesus goes to pray. Chapter 1, verse 35, chapter 6, verse 45, and chapter 14, starting in verse 35. 3 times Jesus prays in the book of Mark. And as one scholar observes, in each instance, Jesus prays alone. He prays at night in a lonely place, and it happens after his disciples fail to understand his mission, and he's faced to force a very important decision. Every single time, same thing happens. Jesus goes to the mountain to pray. There is temptation at hand. Temptation to seize up this movement and go for a messianic throne that is not part of the plan. He goes to prayer. Why? Also that he might cast his anxiety and his frustration on God for his disciples who cannot see what's going on. He also goes into prayer so he can come before God in humble dependence, saying, God, I am committed to the plan. I'm committed. I'm not going any other way but the way that we have already decided to go. And just, this is important. Before we even get to him walking on the water, for Jesus going on the mountain, we need to ask ourselves, where do we go? Where do we go when everybody misunderstands us? Where do we go when we're hopelessly misunderstood and everybody else around us fails us? That's what's happening to Jesus. Everybody's failing. But personally, how do I respond to that? How do you respond? Do you just slink into a dark hole and you just brood over all the issues and just stoke your bitterness and just get mad and more frustrated at the people for their failures and their inability to understand what's going on? Do you lash out? Or do we turn to Jesus in prayer? I mean, we can remember Jesus faced every temptation, yet without sin. Yet Jesus does not do it in a way that we can't follow. He did it all while humbly depending on God in prayer by the power of the Holy Spirit. Never at once accessing his deity to escape something that his humanity could not. Laying out the same path for us to follow. I love this quote by Spurgeon when he says, "You will observe that the desire to commune with God is intensified by the failure of all other sources of consolation." What drives us most to God? Everybody else failing. We get mad because people fail us. Guess what? We're humans. That's what we do. We fail each other. There's only one person that's never going to fail us, and that's God. And when people fail us, that's an invitation into a deeper relationship and more intimate prayer life with God in the midst of failure. Because he's never going to abandon us. He's the only one who can preserve us by his grace, and he's the only one who sees absolutely everything that we're going through. Our friends can't see it, our closest family can't see it, our spouse can't see everything we're going through, but God sees. Verse 47. And when evening came, the boat was out on the sea, and he was alone on the land. And he saw that they were making headway painfully, for the wind was against them. And about the fourth watch of the night, he came to them walking on the sea. He meant to pass by them. But when they saw him walking on the sea, they thought it was a ghost and cried out, for they all saw him and were terrified. But immediately he spoke to them and said, "Take heart, it is I. Do not be afraid." Now, it may not be apparent to us as we're reading through the text, but it's been 8 to 12 hours since Jesus forced the disciples to get on the boat and get rowing. It's been 8 to 12 hours. Under normal conditions, the disciples could have crossed the Sea of Galilee in about 6 to 8 hours. And given the number of commercial fishermen on board, probably the 6, right? But they're only halfway across after 8 to 12 hours of rowing. Brutal, painful, agonizing battle against the wind. And they feel lost. They feel tormented in this storm. But Jesus sees their personal need, and he responds to it. Jesus sees. And it's interesting reading a number of commentators, some of them saying, well, maybe it was getting light enough Jesus could see out through the storm. It's like, he's God. He doesn't need it to be light to see them out in the middle of the lake. He sees their need. And he doesn't ignore their struggle. What happens when Jesus sees? When Jesus sees, Jesus acts. The next thing that happens after Jesus sees, he goes down and he goes out to meet his disciples. See, the very heart of our God is on display in the New Testament and Old Testament alike. When he sees, he responds. I just want to go back. I want you to see this because sometimes we can feel like God really doesn't do anything. He doesn't respond to our needs. He's oblivious to it. I love Exodus chapter 2. In many of the ways, I see some of Mark chapter 6 here. We have God responding to Israel. The Lord said, I have surely, guess what, seen the affliction of my people who are in Egypt, and I have heard their cry because of their taskmasters, and I know their sufferings, and I have come to deliver them out of the land of the Egyptians, to bring them up out of the land to a good and broad land, a land flowing with milk and honey. That's what God says. I've seen it, and I've heard it. I'm here to act. And we see that with Jesus right here. See, when God sees his people suffering, he's driven and motivated to act on their behalf. It's not like we have to cultivate some sort of thing in God where he's now going to respond to us. No, that is how God responds. And Jesus doesn't wait for the storm to calm down. Jesus doesn't wait for the boat to come back. He doesn't wait for it to get to the other side. He goes out to the boat walking across the water. So the miracle's main point is this. There's only one person who can walk on the water. That's God. There's only one person. I mean, we don't have to look for scientific explanations. There's one person who walks on the water. And we see that in Job chapter 9, verse 8. When Job is talking about the glory of God, he says, who alone stretched out the heavens and trampled the waves of the sea? There's only references to God doing such a thing in the Old Testament, and the Old Testament is the Bible the disciples have. Just like everything else Jesus has been doing, has been pointing back to Old Testament passages saying, look who I am, look who I am. This text right here, Jesus saying, look who I am. And in this miracle, Jesus is following a well-established pattern for moments of God's self-revelation. Something that I don't know if everybody's seen in this text before. But there's a pattern that's kind of obscured depending on which version you're reading, okay? So let me highlight something here, because I know we all have different Bibles. We have King James, we have NIV, we have New American Study Bible, we have ESV. There's others, but those are kind of the main ones that we see here on a Sunday. So let me read the four versions, and let's listen to the differences between them, okay? So we're in verse 48, at the end of verse 48. So Jesus walks on the water, and he's coming over to the boat, and it says, he cometh to them walking upon the sea, and would have passed them by. So the King James says, Jesus would have passed them by. The NIV says, he went out to them walking on the lake, and he was about to pass them. So would have passed them, he was about to pass them. Then we get to the New American Study Bible, and it says, he came to them walking on the sea, and he intended to pass them by. And the ESV, he came to them walking on the sea, and he meant to pass them by. Now, when it comes to God's intention, things matter, right? Would Jesus have passed them by if they didn't see him? That seems to be kind of like what the NIV and the King James could be kind of read as. Like he was about to pass them by, but they thought he was a ghost, so he said, whoa, wait a minute. I mean, was Jesus, or was he trying to pass them, or was he not trying to pass them? Well, as I dug into this question this week, I found out, number one, that the Greek text behind all four of those translations is exactly the same, and that's even though the King James uses a different textual tradition than the others do. So exactly the same Greek. So it's not in the Greek. And when I dug into it a little bit more, and you look at the grammar, a very literal translation is this. I mean, this is like as literal as we can get from Greek to English. It's, and he wished to pass by them. So in all versions, what's behind it is, and he wished to pass by them. So now we got more questions to ask. Why would Jesus want to pass by them? They're in a boat. They can't make where they're going. Why does he want to pass by them? Is he going to want to pass them by like a joke and meet them on the other side of the shore? Being like, hey guys, I got here before you did? I mean, is he wanting to pass them by hoping that they won't notice? Like, I'm trying to pass them by because they're so busy, I'm going to sneak around them? I don't think it's either of those. I believe what's totally going on here is the fact that Jesus is following a well-established pattern for divine revelation. A pattern that was established 1,400 years ago, or before Jesus' time, I should say. Exodus chapter 33, starting in verse 19. God speaking to Moses. Right after Moses asked God to show him his glory, after the failure of Israel in the desert and the golden calf incident, God says this in verse 19. I will make all my goodness pass before you, and I will proclaim before you my name, the Lord. And I will be gracious to whom I will be gracious, and I will show mercy on whom I will show mercy. But he said, you cannot see my face, for man shall not see me and live. And the Lord said, behold, there is a place by me where you shall stand on the rock. And while my glory passes by, I will put you in the cleft of the rock, and I will cover you with my hand until I've passed. Then I will take away my hand, and you shall see my back, but my face you shall not see. Now, notice God doesn't pass before Moses so that Moses is not able to discern his divine presence. God doesn't pass by Moses so that he can meet Moses somewhere else. God passes by Moses in order that he might reveal nothing less than his divine glory. That he might reveal his name to his faithful servant Moses. Unfathomable, infinitely holy glory that would kill Moses if Moses saw God face to face. God passes by to reveal himself. We see the same thing happen with Elijah in 1 Kings chapter 19, 11 through 12. And God said, go out and stand on the mountain before the Lord. And behold, the Lord passed by. Same text. And a great and strong wind tore the mountains and broke in pieces the rocks before the Lord. But the Lord wasn't in the wind. And after the wind, an earthquake. But the Lord wasn't in the earthquake. And after an earthquake, a fire. But the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire, the sound of a low whisper. And when Elijah heard it, he wrapped his face in his cloak, and he went out, and he stood at the entrance of the cave. And behold, there came to him a voice, and it said, what are you doing here, Elijah? Elijah, why are you here? See, when Jesus intends to pass by his disciples, he intends to. What's the goal? The goal is to reveal that he's not simply a human Messiah. He's something much more than they ever could have contemplated. He's not just somebody from God, like one of the great prophets of old. He's God incarnate. He's revealing himself in a way so they will know this is something so much more than a man, and he's doing so much more than could happen with Moses and Elijah because they see him face to face. They aren't held in a cleft of a rock. They aren't protected back in a cave, but they see him in front of him. Yet at the very moment and the height of his self-disclosure, the disciples think they're seeing a ghost. Verse 50, for they all saw him. They were all terrified. And immediately he spoke to them and said, take heart. It is I, don't be afraid. Just think back to Exodus for a moment. What did God do for Moses when he passed him by? He protected him. Chapter 34, verse 6. In Exodus, the Lord passed before him, and he proclaimed, the Lord, a God merciful and gracious, slow to anger, abounding in steadfast love and faithfulness. God didn't simply protect Moses, then bring him out to just look at him. What was God's purpose in that disclosure? It was all that God might reveal his name to Moses, something that Moses had never received. What is this divine name of God? What is his character? What is he like? In seeing God's glory is encapsulated in this name, Yahweh. And in the character of Yahweh, what does it mean for God to be Yahweh? It means that he is a God who is merciful, and he's gracious, and he's slow to anger, and he's abounding in steadfast love and faithfulness. Why does Moses need to hear that? Because Israel blew it. He asked to see God's glory because he's trying to figure out, if I follow you, after this people have failed like this, are you really going to keep your word, or are you going to snuff them out in the desert? And he finds in this divine revelation that God is far more glorious and worthy of praise than he ever could have imagined. God is not merely faithful, but God overflows and abounds in a kind of love that we could never fathom. And when Jesus intends to pass them by and they think it's a ghost, Jesus replies, "Take heart, it is I." And when Jesus says, "Take heart, it is I," he's actually using the same kind of self-disclosure that God used in the past. Again, not always clear in our English. It's a fine translation, "it is I." But I think likely what's behind it is two Greek words, ego eimi. If you were reading the Greek version of your Old Testament, when God says, "I am" to Moses, it is ego eimi. So we have Jesus intending to pass them by like God passed by Moses, like God passed by Elijah. And here he passes by his disciples and he reveals his name to them. I am. I am. This moment is the height of Jesus' self-revelation to his disciples. Now, I said self-revelation for an important reason. The transfiguration is coming up. The resurrection is coming up. But this is Jesus' self-revelation in his miracles and what he's doing. I mean, this is the epitome of saying, I am God. And once again, they completely miss the point. Verse 51, and he got into the boat with them, and the wind ceased, and they were utterly astounded. And this utterly astounded is not a positive response. And we know it's not a positive response because in verse 52, it gives us the reason or the ground. For they did not understand about the loaves, but their hearts were hardened. See, there's a significant deficiency in the disciples at this moment. So while the main point of the miracle is Jesus is God, and he's God because nobody but God can walk on the water, I think that the main point of this text this morning is that hard hearts pose a greater threat to personal discipleship than any form of personal danger. And that's the reason why. Is after everything that happens, after everything that Jesus shows about himself, they still don't respond as they ought. And that's a warning that we need to take for ourselves. And what's going on is something that is internal, it is not external. It's not environmental. It's personal. You know, the last time that Mark talked about hardened hearts, in his gospel was in chapter 3, verse 5 at the synagogue at Capernaum. And back then it referred to people who were outsiders. Remember kind of our insiders, outsiders terminology, insiders, those people who are coming to Jesus for answers, those people who are asking questions, those are people who are following Jesus, and the outsiders, those people who refuse to take that step in but just want to stand on the outside and kind of diagnose Jesus or ask him for signs or look for proofs. And the outsiders, the hardened outsiders in chapter 3 were the Pharisees and the Herodians. Two groups all the way through this book that are no good. And now the same term that was applied to the Pharisees is being applied to the disciples. Their hearts are hardened. Again, they've witnessed every single miracle. They've heard all of his teaching in public. They've heard him give answers in private. They've been able to ask him questions. What did that parable mean, Jesus? I didn't get it. And again, don't forget, these men have cast out demons. These men have performed miracles, and they have preached the gospel message all around Galilee. Earlier in this very same chapter. They should be able to understand. They should be able to trust. They should be able to follow. While they're out on the ocean and they're getting battered by the waves, what should they be able to do right now if they understood who Jesus really was as in our human terms, okay, as we think, as they ought to have understood that they're not seen? They should be responding like Psalm chapter 46, verses 1 through 3. God is our refuge and our strength, a very present help in trouble. Therefore, we will not fear, though the earth gives way, though the mountains be moved into the heart of the sea, though its waters roar and foam, though the mountains tremble at its swelling. If they understood who Jesus was, that's where their hearts should be. But they're hard. They're hard. And I want to take a moment at the end here this morning to I want to give two observations about this hardness of heart. To try to bring it to the ground a little bit, to think, how does it work? And I want to grab it in two ways. One, I want to talk about those who are unbelievers, and as we interact with unbelievers in our life. And then I want to deal with hardness and believers. So first of all, what I want you to understand is that we see this kind of hardness all the time in non-Christians as they begin to respond to the gospel. Okay, hear the second part of that. Okay? The disciples, are they rejecting Jesus, yes or no? No, they're not rejecting Jesus. In many ways, are they motivated by Jesus? Yes. In some ways, are they trusting Jesus? In some ways, yes. But with unbelievers who are kind of moving towards Jesus but not fully embracing him in faith, they're often drawn to Jesus out of a sense of true need, and they see Jesus as being able to satisfy a need, but they're unwilling to fully embrace Jesus in faith. We see this all the time. I don't think that we always understand it for what it is. They can talk very positively about the Bible. They can talk very positively about Jesus, even about following Jesus. But it's not from a heart of true, abiding faith in Jesus. And see, the danger is that because this is not true saving faith, they can be very deceived to think that they are on the inside when they are really on the outside. And even more, the danger with this is that I think that many well-intending believers and well-intending pastors behave as if this partial response and motivation to finding certain needs met in Jesus is actually saving faith, when it is in actuality an incomplete response to the gospel that is not true saving faith. It's dangerous. And it's beginning, but notice, it has positive trends. They're moving from a place where they were against Jesus, and they're moving towards Jesus. They see needs that can be met in Jesus, and they see good. They're not rejecting him, but they haven't come to faith. Like we can somehow compartmentalize our life like a fishing tackle box, or those drawers in the garage where you have all those little bins and nuts and all those extra hodgepodge parts from projects you don't know where they went in the first place, and they never made it back in, so they go in the bins, right? And we kind of compartmentalize our life, and they want to give Jesus a couple parts, but not the whole. And we do them a disservice if we act as if it is the same thing. See, what these people need in their lives when unbelievers are trending towards Jesus. So there's positive movement, okay? So hear this. This is positive. What they need are good, solid disciples and pastors in their life to help them see where they still need to go. They need people to speak into their lives lovingly. They don't need to be browbeat. But they need people to help them see what is faith and what isn't faith. And this isn't an issue of judging people, but it's a matter of listening to what their response in Jesus is, in their own words, and what their response to Jesus isn't. And the whole goal in this is that they might come to faith in Jesus. So the speaking into their life is something out of love for them. Because as we saw in chapter 4, with the parable of the sower, in the parable of the sower, Jesus reminds us that affinity for Jesus is not the same thing as true saving faith in Jesus. Remember the seed that falls on the thin soil, but the rock is underneath it? It looks like something happens and it dies out. And the seed that falls in the thorny ground, it looks like something's going to happen, but it never bears fruit. Only one bears fruit. There's responses that look good and look like faith, but they prove not to be. And so that's the goal here, is we want to make sure that hardness, if we think of that hardness being like the thin layer of soil and the hard pack underneath it, we want to make sure that that's what's not happening. They need people to tell them that we can't pick and choose the areas we want Jesus to speak into our lives. Jesus is an all or nothing Savior. And if we get this wrong, we get everything wrong. I mean, this isn't about differences between different denominations. This is about being truly born again or being self-deceived. And we want to make sure that in our efforts to love other people and help them come to faith in Jesus Christ, that we don't perpetuate self-deception. And that's always out of love. So that's the first observation. Second is we need to understand that the journey of our discipleship in Jesus Christ is often a war against self-sufficient hardness as well. So talking to believers, the greatest danger that you and I face is not unexpected illness. The greatest danger that you and I face is not physical danger It's not job loss. It's not political transformation in our nation. And it's not religious persecution. Those are not our greatest dangers. The greatest danger that you and I face is that you and I are prone to find comfort in our own abilities and in our own resources. And as we become more confident and more settled and more dependent on our own resources and our own abilities, our hearts will become harder and harder to the infinite worth and glory of Jesus Christ. Notice when the disciples are out on the sea, we have no record of them calling out to Jesus, asking for help. The picture we have is of 12 men saying, "We can make it to the other side. Keep pulling at the oars. We can make it. We've done it before." And that's where we can go as Christians. We can begin in a wonderful place of delight and joy in Jesus and passion for Jesus. And end up over time in our life in a place where my heart isn't moved by anything. So how can we tell if this is happening? How can we tell? I only have 3 simple questions today. We could ask more, but just kind of 3 simple things to ask. Number 1, what do you do and where do you go when life begins to unravel? When everything starts to blow up, what do you do? Do you look at all of your own personal resources and all your own abilities, and you look at your problem and you look at your resources and abilities, and you start to just crumble because you can tell, I don't have what it takes. And you start to just spiral out of control because the more you look at it and the more you try to figure out a way out, every option you run comes out the same way and says, this is going to blow up. It's not going to work. I don't have the money, or I don't have this, I don't have the ability to fix it. Are you somebody who, when everything starts to go apart in your life, you kind of pull back and you turn on the TV and you just start binge watching Netflix or some series, just something just kind of just going on in front of me to keep my mind occupied during the day so I don't have to think about it? Do you turn to alcohol? Just some way to numb the pain. Or do you turn to God in prayer? Where does Jesus go at the beginning of the episode? He dismisses everybody and he goes to God in prayer. That should be our first impulse, but why isn't it? It's because we develop this hardness over time that we say, I got this, God. Second question. Why do you read your Bible? Now, I made an assumption here, and I hope the assumption is right. I hope that you guys are actually reading your Bible weekly. But why? Why do you read your Bible? Did you read your Bible out of duty and obligation? I remember when I was younger, feeling like anything bad that happened in my day was the result of me not having my devotions in the morning. well, God's punishing me because I didn't read my Bible and I didn't take time in prayer. I mean, it's like God's malicious, right? Or somehow I put up this magical force field around me because I read my Bible and I took time in prayer. No, that's wrong. Why do I go to the Word? And why do I go there daily? And yes, I mean, I get paid to study God's Word and preach and to teach, but I also have my personal time that is not part of my study time. And why do I go there? I go there because I want to delight in, and I want to see, and I want to savor, and I want to know Jesus Christ. And the only place I'm going to get to know Him is in the pages of this book. As the Holy Spirit illuminates my mind and helps me see clearer and more who He is and what He's done. That's why I want to be in the Word every single day, because it's like me eating food for breakfast and eating food for lunch and eating food for dinner. Just as that keeps me physically alive, being in the Word keeps me spiritually alive. And you can't make it on one meal a week. Number 3, diagnostic question, final. All simples. This one's simple. Why do you attend Sunday morning worship? I mean, I think some people have been doing it so long they don't even think about it anymore. Like, it's Sunday, I go to church, Pastor Mark. That's what good Christians do. And it's like, well, okay, there is a yes to that, but we can go for all sorts of wrong reasons. Right? We can go because we're hoping that the worship team is going to entertain us and put on a great worship show. We can go because we feel an obligation to go. It's kind of like the devotions I talked about. We have this obligation to go and show up to church, and by going to church, I'm somehow met a responsibility to God. Some people go to church just because it's a good chance to meet some of my friends, and it's a place I can hang out with other nice people. And I know it's a better place to meet people that I could hang out with than at other places. I don't know if that's the best reason to come to church, but it's like, are those things, or do we come to Sunday morning worship because we want to encounter God? Why do we have a time of worship and song? God calls us to proclaim and sing His praises. It's a time as a congregation to highlight great, deep truths from God's Word and to sing them to each other. Not to be entertained. We are singing to God, but we're also reminding each other. And in those songs, there are people in every week that are at high points in their life. There are people that are low points in their life, and we need to hear this all together. We come and we sit under the Word, also in worship, that we might hear it and respond to what God has to say. We want Him to speak to us, that we might see Him for He truly is, because we know that our hearts are fickle. So as we close, I'm not asking these questions to shame anybody. I want you to know and never forget that Jesus sees everything that you're going through. He sees. Not only does He see, but He's promised to support you through every trial and temptation. And even more than that, Jesus satisfies our deepest longings. Not with gifts, not with stuff, but with Himself. Let's close in a word of prayer.